Hopefully that works.
Okay.
Yay!
Get all set up. It's so weird in here.
It's
Okay.
all good.
There we
Oh, you look so pretty. I love your makeup.
I decided to do something nice for myself, so I got dressed today.
Yeah, right. I was just talking to my girlfriends about that. Her name's Lexi, and we were like talking about that. It's like we accomplished jeans today. Like,
I am wearing
right?
jeans.
Oh man, that's awesome. Well, thank you so much for doing this. How are you doing
Yeah.
with everything?
Sorry, say that again.
How are you doing today?
I'm doing pretty good. I slept, which is like easier to not do when uh, you're like pursuing entrepreneurship and you're really excited about what you do, and you're like, I could stay up all night and do content, and then that trickles into next week, and you don't know
Mhm.
what day it is anymore, and you feel like crap. So I slept.
Yeah, that's a win, right?
Yeah, it's definitely a win.
Good stuff. Well, thank you everyone for tuning in, and thank you again, Sky. So we're both live here in Denver right now. I know I've been doing lives with everybody from all around the world, but I'm finally happy to have one of my girls from my home state. Anyways, so this is part of my High Achieving Hustlers Tuesdays and Thursdays. Always looking to add value, and I'm super excited about today's guest. So she's one of my best friends from high school, literally years ago. We've been through so much together, and she's a total badass. So with that, I'm just super excited to introduce you all to the lovely Sky Marie Gutierrez. So a little bit about Sky. She's a self-proclaimed jack of all trades. Sky started working at the Museum of Contemporary Art out of high school. Also started working out as a makeup artist. She later transitioned to a receptionist gig to support her creative endeavor, where she fell in love with an unlikely path, design and construction. So after 7 years of working in the lighting design space, her world crumbled after a back-to-back pregnancy losses. She lost traction in her career, compromised her health, and battled a very dark depression of 2 individual years, leading her to start a high impact-driven nonprofit to make tools for and resources after pregnancy loss more accessible for women and men. So we'll hear a lot more about that today. So with that being said, Sky, thank you again for being on this Q&A today.
Yeah, of course. And you may hear a barking dog. So she's showed up on every Zoom call this week.
It's all good. Will she make a guest appearance?
She will not. She is away
Okay.
because there are guys working outside in our yard, and she is very barky right now.
Oh, all good. Hey, Victoria, Carlton, thank you so much for tuning in. Okay, so first of all, Sky, can you tell us briefly about your journey and how you got started?
Yeah, so everything has kind of been trial and error for me. College wasn't really an option for me, like right out of high school. I did terribly in school. I wasn't a great student, and overcoming some interpersonal family challenges. So I grew up in a very abusive home, and so it made it really hard to see myself in a place of success as a child, let alone pursuing any kind of success as an adult. So I struggled in the first 5 years of really just trying to figure out who I want to be, what I want to do, and I think that I just tried a ton of things and picked up skills along the way that I've been able to pull into one place and try to cultivate skills and resources for others. I think building equity for other people has become my biggest priority.
Yeah, I think that's awesome. So I guess as we're talking about equity, I know we're going to go in deeper on like digital equity. What would be your definition of that? I know some people have never even heard of it before.
Yeah, so digital equity talks a lot about the digital divide. And so when you have digital equity, meaning that you have access to internet, access to technology that makes the things on the internet more accessible, and also the tools and resources to be able to utilize that information, what that has the opportunity to do is create social and economic mobility for underserved communities. And it also has the opportunity to make healthcare access much easier, bringing health information. So sometimes you don't need to go to a doctor, but it's hard to figure out what it is that you need if it's hard to sift through on the internet. And so that what makes self-care really difficult. It makes education, especially cost affordable education, more possible. I am spending so much time on Google, like how to do
Mhm.
branding strategy for X. And so I deep dive into it, but that wouldn't be possible without an internet connection or without a computer to do it. I was actually impacted by digital inequity up to the point of 22 because I didn't have a personal computer. So starting to be an entrepreneur at 19, I was just out of out of depth a lot of the time, and it made it really hard to build new resources, build new skills, and push forward in my path as a makeup artist. So that was something that was a big hindrance. And once I received a laptop, I was able to make pivotal changes in my personal life and my career that have led me to build so much equity in a way that I never thought was fathomable in terms of like professional equity and economic equity.
Yeah, totally. Can you share a little bit about, your story and how like where you like started to notice that like really show up for you? Because I know as you mentioned, like starting out as a makeup artist, you didn't have that, but then maybe like when you started on your path in construction and lighting, that's kind of when
Yeah.
you started to pivot. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so when I started in construction and lighting design at the time was actually right around the time that I got a laptop, and I was being an artist is an ongoing struggle, and so I was just struggling to pay bills, keep food in the fridge, and I needed something more tangible. That computer led to me being able to find a receptionist job through a temp agency, and that temp agency, as the starting as a receptionist, put me through a path to pursue lighting design in a way where most people in my field are educated and I'm uneducated. And so it created this opportunity not only to have a job where I made more money than most women in my entire family on a standalone basis, which totally changed the game for me, but also being able to cultivate those skills that some people pursued an education for that wasn't really an option for me. So it opened up webinars or Google to find out how certain elements of physics work because I didn't do great in school, and these things that weren't really available to me in the past. It opened up the floodgates and made so much more available to me that I was able to just break a cycle of poverty almost with this tool. And I specifically watched over time this tool change my life, but there are still issues around me being able to do certain things, like the catch up trend. Like I'm catching up to everything I didn't know,
Mhm.
or yeah, things that I think I didn't need to know, but I actually do need to know.
Yeah, no, I totally relate. Well, and especially because, like, kind of relating it back to what I'm doing now with like consulting, professional development. These are all new things that I wasn't exposed to pretty early on. It didn't come until like I was late in my career in finance, but
Mm-hmm.
this is like the norm for some people. And it's just like interesting because it's like, how can we, provide access or even just like, even teach some of these things like really early on, just to like, so that people don't have to catch up like so often.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so when we were talking a little bit about digital equity, you definitely talked a little bit about how like, there are four requirements, right? So one,
Mm-hmm.
being reliable, two, around the access, and three, it's just not all the info. It has to be like, it's not all about the information. It has to be like actionable as well and not financially exclusive. Can you share a little bit about your thoughts on like the digital divide, especially in the online space?
Yeah, so the digital divide affects so many different people. So it affects people in rural communities, people of color, low income people, people on disability, or people with disabilities, rather, let me be more correct, and people who are elderly or struggle with technology. And what makes this what makes this challenging in the modern era is that we are creating a world or building a world where all of these people are being left behind. So your inability, or not your inability, but the inability to have adequate or reliable access to technology or internet shouldn't limit you from achieving success. And so that, I think, is something that a lot of these communities are really struggling with. And it really took COVID to be like, oh yeah, this is a problem, guys. We
Yeah,
need to circle back and fix it.
exactly. Hmm.
And and with it, like I think that there are four like main pillars, like you said. It has to be reliable. I believe public information has the opportunity to change and shape lives. There's an incident that you and I talked about from my past as a child that hugely shaped the outcome of my entire life in a way that I would have never known, or I wasn't even aware that a PSA that I had heard on TV shaped my life so heavily,
Yep.
but it came from a reliable source, and it fundamentally changed or shifted the trajectory of my entire life in a drastically different direction.
Yeah.
But it has to be reliable. With the phenomenon that all humans now have smartphones and we can all put information out into the world, there is tons of information to sift through. So you have no clue where to begin, or is it just coming from Sandy down the street who has an opinion, or is it coming from a doctor,
Yeah.
or is it coming from the government, or so it has to be reliable in order for it to be accessible. Because also, like, you also just don't know who you're getting into. On TikTok, I saw doctors having to tell young girls to not eat the moist wicking tablets in pregnancy tests because someone told them it was Plan B. Don't eat it. Don't.
Oh my God.
No.
Yeah.
But that's the problem, and that's what digital equity means. It means bringing adequate tools to people, reliable tools to people where they are. And so it has to be reliable first and foremost. And then circling back to multiple platforms. So TikTok is a great avenue. Tons of doctors are on there. TikTok actually gave me a lot of courage recently to like walk away from toxic relationships that were really bad for me. And so not everybody is fully connected in all of the ways. Some people just have the smartphone, some people are fully connected. And so when you bring the same set of information to multiple platforms in multiple contexts that are absorbable, it has the ability to really make the largest range of impact. Because the circling back to the TikTok thing, how many people were eating that tablet and shouldn't have done it because someone said to. And so someone had to address it on TikTok. A lot of trends are being addressed on TikTok or Facebook, but then also circling back to blogs. So it has to be fully encompassing because not everyone can get to the blog, but they can get to Instagram. And so that's the hard part, is taking large concepts or big detailed information and pulling it in to other accessible platforms. There's tons of brands that do it really well, and I really want to be able to emulate that.
Yeah.
The third pillar for me is it can't just be information. Information is everywhere. It has to also be attainable in terms of being able to be deconstructed as well as applicable. So one of the things that I think for me was really relevant is I didn't learn how to actually set and achieve a goal until 3 years ago. So I was constantly chasing big dreams, big ideas, not really understanding in what consistency was or how to like block out time to make sure I achieved certain tasks and what the structure of achieving a big lofty goal actually looks like. I've never taken the elephant down and broke it into tiny pieces. And so when I had someone through a book show me this is how you achieve a goal, it changed everything. And how do we take that and apply it in more ways? Because it took years for someone to say, like, no, it's just this easy. You do it like this. That was taking a big concept, making it actionable, and putting it in a medium that was obtainable to me for it to make like the biggest impact.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's like a really big deal because there's tons of information out there, but just because you put information out there doesn't mean people are going to be able to understand it or apply it. So that's huge. And the last fourth pillar for me is financial exclusivity. So one of the things, there's always in the haves and the have-nots, there's a wide gap. And within the have-nots, there's always people who have more. I've always kind of found myself in the middle of that. It wasn't until last year was I able to actually like really put money into my career. So I went to a business conference and it was the best thing that I had ever done, but it took every penny out of me to just be able to provide that for myself. So there's tons of exclusivity in the knowledge space. And I get it. Everyone is an entrepreneur, and the greatest experience our experiences is the greatest knowledge that we have to share. Yeah. And to be an entrepreneur, you have to make money. Like, I totally get that. But there's a line between profit and exclusivity that makes growth for a certain demographic of people inaccessible. And that is something within the health and wellness space that I think needs to be demystified, because health and wellness should never be a luxury service. And
Yeah.
so that's really what we want to change for men and women.
No, totally. I feel like my boyfriend and I get into this all the time. He's watching right now. Hey, Carlton. um, but yeah, I feel like, he and I get into this a lot because we always talk about like how healthcare, at least in the UK, it's completely free. And, like
Mm-hmm.
things wrong, you can go get help, you can go get seen. Whereas here, oftentimes you end up getting, it's like an arm and leg to go, or you get hit with a bill like right after, which is like atrocious, and then there's all that talk about, like when they actually break down hospital bills, like it's so like broken down into like certain pieces where it's just like, is that really necessary? Like you're really charging me for that, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, but I guess this definitely like, brings up, like your nonprofit. Can you tell us a little bit more about like your vision and mission for your organization and, like what, like the solution basically, to this greater issue?
Yeah. So I started Miscarriage Thrive Tribe in January of 2020.
Yeah.
So pretty recently,
Congrats.
it's kind of a hot mess. It's present, not perfect.
Mhm.
We're still trying to figure it out. I have zero experience in a nonprofit, and my background's in construction and design and project management. So those are skills that I can kind of leverage over on this side, but I have no clue what I'm doing. And I think that a lot of entrepreneurs start that way.
Mhm.
They have this idea or there's this problem that they see, and sometimes it comes from a very personal space where you're like, this can't just be me. This I'm not it's statistically impossible for this to just be my problem, but I'm not seeing what I need to see in this space, so I'm just going to go build it.
Mhm.
And I think that that's a really big deal for entrepreneurs to just say, I have no clue what I'm doing. I'm just going to dive in and build it. We're going to figure it out and patch it up along the way, and it'll be pretty later.
Yep.
But it did really come out of a personal need for me, and I decided that I needed to be my client first. And so part of building this business is taking everything that I have deconstructed over the last 3 years of my experiences after multiple miscarriages back to back, and the things that actually were detrimental to my well-being, and trying to find ways to not only work on me but also knowing that there are so many women with less than I have struggling with the very same problem, and I can't live with that. So I have equity to share, and I'm going to share it.
Mhm.
And I don't exactly know all of the ways how yet, but I just know that it needs to be shared.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
So that's like the big thing for us, is just get it out there.
Mhm.
And
Oh,
so to kind of like compare 2 years back to back, and why this is so critical. So this time last year, in March, I had my second miscarriage. And at that time, I was uninsured, working for a startup. So it meant that I had to get my health care from Planned Parenthood.
mhm.
And it meant that therapy was unattainable because out of pocket or non out of pocket therapy is relatively expensive. And I think that everybody on the planet could benefit from therapy, but it's a luxury service. Not everybody can actually afford $80 a week, $80 every 2 weeks. And
Exactly.
when it becomes an actual need, how do we differentiate that line between calling it a luxury service and establishing it as a fundamental need and right? So that became a huge issue for me. Last year, I developed really bad anxiety and insomnia that led to this depression that lasted about a whole year. And it had these different phases that were really just complicated because I also had taken a big tried to take a big leap in my career at this startup, and so it happened right as I started at a startup. So anyone knows that when you start a new endeavor or a new job, or taking on a little bit more professionally, that's a lot in itself, and it is so demanding of yourself to grow in that capacity. And then you partner it with a trauma and a medical health issue that makes it challenging to balance the two, and it was just a nightmare. So I struggled for a really long time professionally, even though like these things were things I knew I was able to do, but in the depth of where I was emotionally, I just couldn't get there. I knew I was capable of more, and I knew that I could do these things because I had proved it in the past professionally, but I just couldn't get there for whatever reason, and I lost my job. And you know, what's alarming is that like I can't be the only person to struggle professionally after this kind of experience, and I haven't been able to connect with enough women to hear a representative story of mine. And that's that's the big thing, is that I didn't see other women dealing with this. I didn't see other women thriving after.
Yeah.
I just saw nothing. And every resource I found online was, you're going to be depressed.
Mm.
And it's like, cool, thanks, Dr. Chad.
Yeah.
What am I going to do about it?
Well,
I can't
yeah.
do anything.
Yeah, well, I think a lot of it too is like even like the stigma behind it, right? Like people don't talk about it, and it's one of those topics where you're just like, it's almost like taboo. Like you're not supposed to bring it up.
Yeah.
Whether
So
it's
like
yeah.
yeah, it's that's a part of it. So like I think that it combines two taboo issues:
Hmm.
women's bodies and
Yep.
mental health. And so
Hmm.
so it creates um a lot of mixed energies, because it's so taboo, and it's also really sad, and other people don't want to offend us, or they don't know what to say to us,
Yeah.
they don't know how to treat us, and so it becomes this really complex place. And I really could have benefited from a coach or a mentor, and I couldn't find one, or I couldn't afford one because I couldn't even afford therapy. So that was last year. And then we're going to flash forward to this year.
Hmm.
And so I'm still recovering financially. So that is a whole thing that I feel maybe needs to be explored.
Hmm.
We'll see. And there's still so much professional work or personal work for me to do. And what no one told me when I got into business was, business coaching is life coaching. You're going to be working on you forever.
Yeah,
And you're not going to be able to show up in your community, be a better version of yourself, be successful if you don't work on this.
exactly.
And no one said that.
Yeah, it's so
No.
true though, because it's like even with like some clients that I have right now, it's like everybody thinks it's a business problem, but when we start to unpack it like more and more and more, it's definitely not. Victoria, yeah, yep, exactly. Victoria's a mindset coach, so I had her on a Q&A last time. Um, but yeah, that's exactly it. You got to work on the inner work first, and more oftentimes than not, it's not always a business problem. It's definitely like something going on up here, mindset, or something to do with the inner work.
Yeah, and so like that was something that like I realized it wasn't my inability to do my job. I just hated everything about my life,
Yeah.
and I couldn't get there.
Hmm.
But now I'm insured. But I pay $1,000 a month for
Yep.
health insurance,
Oh.
and that means that I can't even afford care now
Hmm.
because I pay so much to just be covered.
Yeah.
And so I I on my own can't take on the Goliath of healthcare by
Hmm.
myself. But what I can do is leverage my equity to bring healthcare to people who need it.
Hmm.
And that's kind of our overall mission,
Yeah.
because even though I believe that we should have universal healthcare, that's a personal opinion, and I want to see major changes in the healthcare space,
Hmm.
because, you know, in like paying the money that we pay for a privatized healthcare system is not doing us any favors,
Yeah.
and it hurts us. And there are so many studies that show that it hurts us. So much evidence is it's just prevalent in every part of the healthcare industry, but it takes so much change to change such a big system.
Hmm.
I can't do that.
Yeah.
I realistically, that is not anything that I can achieve in this scope and time. But what I can do is bring things to people who need them. So we want to be able to offer healthcare sponsorship, so specifically for women who are paying out of pocket for post care. I know that not a lot of people have the ability to have an emergency fund for $1,000,
Yeah.
let alone a $500 expense. And that means that when you go to Planned Parenthood for your post care after a miscarriage,
Hmm.
you're starting at $300, and that's out of pocket in
Yeah.
cash, $300, and so many people just don't have that money.
Hmm.
So our goal is to be able to sponsor those services, or even transportation to those services, so healthcare is a little bit more attainable to women in this space that need it. And we want to eventually bring free therapy to our community. We'll start with partnering with discounts on therapy until we can bring an in-house therapist in and offer free counseling. So we're going to offer group settings and individualized care,
Hmm.
and it'll help create plans to work through this process. We also want to create next step plans in the hopes of future pregnancy. So there's a widespread vast array of reasons why women struggle with getting pregnant or the reasons why we lose a baby. Mine is directly tied to PCOS, which I didn't know I had, and it makes sense looking back at my entire um, cycle as a girl, and knowing that like, oh, I see all of these things that no one ever talked about because we don't talk about women's bodies.
Yeah.
And I didn't know that these things were irregular. It was just a thing.
Yeah.
I didn't know I was struggling with something that then later led to something else.
Mhm.
The other thing that we really want to do is we want to start initiating studies into the health and wellness of women and men after pregnancy loss. And the reason that I really want to dive deep into that is because I've been looking and I find studies scattered throughout the internet,
Mhm.
and it just doesn't, I don't feel as though it fully encapsulates the issues that we're going through.
Right.
And I heard something recently on a webinar. If it is not, what is it? I have to share this with the world. This changed my mind.
Yeah.
What doesn't get measured doesn't get prioritized.
Mm.
That blew my mind. And there's so many experiences, not just in this space, but in all spaces, professionally and personally. If it is not measured, it is not prioritized. And so, if we are not adequately looking at how this impacts women's health and their professional mobility,
Yeah.
do we even know that these things are problems?
Yeah.
And there's no way in hell I'm the only one. No way.
Exactly.
Not
Well,
taking that.
and even
And
men.
if I am, I'll step back from that statement.
Yeah.
I'll walk off. I'll walk off my soapbox anytime. But I'm gonna have to have data to prove me wrong.
Yeah. Well, I was gonna say, like, even men too. 'Cause
Yeah,
in these
and
situations,
that's
I feel like only, they only talk about women.
yeah,
Mhm.
and that's a space that I really want to dive into a little bit more deeply. My husband struggled, and it also impacts the marriage. Like,
Mhm.
divorce is a side effect of miscarriage.
Yeah.
Like, what? No,
Yeah.
that can't be true. So it impacts men too, and it impacts men differently. We Because of the way that we culturally groom men and women,
Mhm.
women are cultivated to be children bearers.
Yeah.
And it's an identity issue because we're a failure. We
Mhm.
failed. And it creates different problems for us.
Mm.
I haven't seen enough information about how this impacts men, but I know that it needs to be addressed for them
Yeah.
because when my husband went onto the internet to try to seek comfort, women told him that it wasn't his problem, that he had no right to feel sad, and that he should go comfort me. No, no,
Oh my
sis, we
God.
are not accepting that. We are not taking that into 2020. No,
Yeah, that's bad. Oh,
no.
goodness.
And that's where I feel men are heavily alienated. It's considered a women's problem, and for a majority of some of the issues around it, it is. It's about our health and it's about our well-being, and that is very specific to women that men cannot be involved with. Like, men can be our allies, and our husbands can be our partners, and they
Yeah.
can support us, and they can help make sure that we are healthy and well. But that is fundamentally separate from how men cope and deal with it. And there's also this weighing problem on men that you need to be a man. You need to be
Mhm.
tough. You're not allowed to feel sad. You're not allowed to grieve. You're not allowed to be anything less than this rigid version
Mhm.
of what we've described
Yeah.
as masculinity. And that's dangerous. And pregnancy loss is freaking hard.
Yeah.
And it deserves the credit to the men who support us, but they also deserve support for how they feel.
Mhm. Yeah.
And I think that like that I think we have to address differently. I'm still trying to figure
Mhm.
that portion out, but I know that it needs to be addressed.
Yeah.
And I didn't build this thing or start building this thing because I just felt like it. I saw a fundamental need and was like, okay, we need to fix this. My daughter cannot grow up in a world where this is an issue for her moving forward.
Yeah. Exactly. I just love your energy and your passion around this because I feel like it's so necessary. And I keep telling you that, like, even when you were first telling me about your idea about this, I'm just like, let me know whatever you need support in. Like, I'm here. I got you. Excuse me. Because, like, I think, well, I'd like to talk a little bit about like the big data, and
Yeah.
then, kind of tie this back into, a little bit of the digital equity as well. Like, even for yourself, like, like what were some of the challenges starting this up?
Okay, yeah. So pregnancy, a miscarriage impacts about 25% of all pregnancies.
Hmm.
That number tends to be a little bit higher for unknown pregnancies and early pregnancy losses because women just don't know that they're pregnant.
Hmm.
And it's really hard to gauge. Women shouldn't have to learn about having their first miscarriage from the internet.
Yeah.
That should be a part of healthcare. Like that should be a part of comprehensive sex ed, but that's a whole other deep dive on
Yeah.
comprehensive sex ed and what that means for women. But yeah, we honestly shouldn't be learning about these things from the internet, but we're going to have to. And so there's a lot of things that talk about, how you're going to feel and the symptoms that you may experience, but that's kind of where it stops.
Hmm.
And I do see other nonprofits in the same space offering tools, and I want to be able to kind of be the funnel for all women. So I want it to be a gigantic funnel to throw all of this in. Like I cannot, like I'm biracial and I'm Hispanic. I cannot speak to the black woman's experience and having a miscarriage in America. I cannot, especially with the skyrocketing numbers of deaths after or during pregnancy that they experience. I cannot speak to that and I will not try. But I can find women who can. And that's the community that we want to be able to build because I can't address that issue. That is not my issue to address. I am Hispanic and so that is not for me to talk about. But it still needs to be advocated for. Um, and so when we look at like numbers in terms of even my experience like being uninsured, and this is why I think that this, circling back to us being able to provide in-depth studies for these women, is going to help shape the services and tools that we offer, and even potentially legislation for women's health. Kind of deep diving into like what legislation looks like and more inclusive legislation, but I don't know how deep I want to dive into the political side of it. I want this to be a very unilateral platform. But in 2018, 10.8 million women were uninsured. That's a lot of women.
Hmm.
So if we take that 10.8 million and take 25% out of just the unemployed or the uninsured women, that's 2.7 million women who may have needed services and not been able to obtain them. 2.7 million is an obscene number for something so common, and that's also the thing that we experience with this issue as well. It's common.
Hmm.
Tons, like when you start talking about it, you're like, oh, I didn't know. Like, oh, she
Yeah.
didn't talk about it either, but she experienced this too, and like I didn't know. And it is common. It is very, very common, and it's very, very hard. But just because it's common, it doesn't mean that we don't need to rise up to address these issues. And I think that they're fundamental and valuable issues to address. Um, because 2.7 million women without access to therapy makes me very upset.
Yeah. It's a
It
huge
hurts my
number.
little
That
heart.
is a huge number. Well, and it's because and a lot of people don't like realize it or even think about it because it's like taboo, right? It's like societal or even parental influences as well, where it's like, no, you're not allowed to talk about that. And so a lot of
Yeah,
people just don't bring it to surface. Yeah.
yeah. And I think that that's also the thing that like we want to radically change the message on a large, large level about how we talk about this. Like, yes, it's hard and it's sad and it's uncomfortable and gross and messy and all kinds of the feelings that we don't want to feel.
Yep.
But what COVID proved to us is that we can have these conversations about the things that are sad or the things that are heavy or dark. We just have to actually create a space for people to be able to talk about them. And when there's this narrative of not being able to like adequately talk about our bodies and not being able to like find like adequate information about how our bodies work,
Yep.
like it creates this headspace of like there's something wrong with me or it's not that big of a deal. And we have to like fundamentally shift the narrative around how we talk about our health, because this is about our health, not us being sexual objects or even just our sexuality in general. This is fundamentally about our health. And I think that like changing that narrative of our bodies, of our health, will radically change the way that we talk about this on a large, large scale.
That's awesome. Mic drop right there. Gosh. That's so good. Well, I'm just, forever inspired by you and like, what you're doing and just like your passion behind all of this because I feel like, even when we were talking about it, when it was like an idea, just like, even a couple of years ago, right? I just like, I just really wanted to get behind you on doing this because there is, a need for this. And I feel like I completely agree. It's all about holding space, and there is nothing like this for this area. You know what I mean? Um, so I love to end all of these Q&As with action steps. So, for my young professionals and young entrepreneurs in the audience or catching the replay, what advice do you have for them as far as like, wanting to make an impact or, to even start their own nonprofit organization?
Yeah. Um, any business, it doesn't matter if it's in the nonprofit space or in the private sector. And sorry.
Like,
Um, Regardless of what business, and I think that this is starting to really show up for me now because I'm actually doing this work, and it's changing the way that I'm approaching this because I know how to work inside someone else's business. I know how to be successful in a structure already created for me, and I understand their rules and their operations, and that is it's easy to rise and create success and monetize and track that success pattern. What's difficult in entrepreneurship is it's a roller coaster of up, down, I should give
exactly.
up, I hate what I'm doing, who am I to show up and try this thing? Like, that's dumb. No. But it has to start with your core virtues. I'm not going to say values anymore. Values are your ideas. Like, values are ideas. Values are how you wish to act in the world. Virtue is your values in action.
Mm-hmm.
And so you have to understand your virtues. You have to understand what is important to you. And I'm starting to really do this work now. I didn't realize when I was working in other people's industries, especially like male-dominated industries, where there weren't a lot of women talking about these things or cultivation for these things. Like you have to establish what is a must and what you cannot, like what cannot be there. So like
Yeah.
establishing your values and your and clarity around who you are, why you're doing this, because you can't achieve the how without the why, and everyone is always chasing the how, and so every time you put the how, like every time I've written a business plan for this nonprofit without getting super deep on my values and my clarity into the whys, it just it just didn't make sense. I'm doing all of the motions, but it just wasn't clicking. When I sat down and spent the time and effort cultivating the why, everything's like, oh, this is how we're going to market. This is how I'm building this business plan. This is how we're funding this business. We're going to do it this way. We're going to do it this way. And this is why these things matter. Starting with your virtues is 100% the most important thing. And I wish I would have learned that sooner.
Thank you for sharing that. I love that distinction. I've never heard about it that way, but you're exactly right. Because I feel like people really get caught up in like the how and like they just start going right away, but it
Mhm.
might not make sense and it might not even get you to your actual goal, right? But
Yeah.
yeah, well, I just want to thank you again so much for being on this because I feel like you just dropped so much, amazing wisdom, gold, advice, and just thank you for sharing your story today. I just appreciate you being vulnerable with all of us because I know it is something that's personal, but what you're about to create out of this is amazing, right? So Carlton says powerful. You're forever so wise, and I'm so glad that we're friends. You're a total powerhouse, and I'm just super excited for what you're doing for men and women in this space.
Thank
So for
you.
people, wanting to get, more information about this, or, if they just want to speak with you directly, how can they get in touch with you?
Yeah, so right now, Instagram is probably the best. We are in the middle of our website is under construction, and we're just trying to get all of the digital details figured out. So at Miscarriage Thrive Tribe on Instagram is the best way to connect with us.
Okay, perfect. And I'll have that tagged here in the replay as well. So again, I just want to thank everybody for tuning in. And if you're catching the replay, I hope you got a lot from this. Let me know your feedback as always. And if you'd like me to have Sky on again sometime. Any final thoughts from you, Sky?
No, I'm really excited that we're friends, and I'm just I'm just really honored that you gave me this opportunity to just kind of get it all out.
Of course, girl.
I have to talk my way through problems. I'm an auditory learner, and
Uh-huh.
so when I'm just like pen and paper, it having this opportunity to just talk it out
Yeah.
gives me clarity more and more each time. So every time I just talk about it, I get more clarity, and it's super beneficial for me. And I'm just so thankful for our friendship, and your ability to hold space for me through our friendship has been just the most meaningful thing. So just love
Yeah.
your face. That's
Thank
all.
you too. Love you too. Well, and I think we should end with that too, just because I think that is a really, really good advice as well. Just to kind of like talk this out, because I think even like when you're sharing your story, or even like you're pitching to somebody, like what's your elevator pitch, right? I feel like when I explain what I do to people, it changes every single time. But the more you do it and the more you share, obviously one, you're getting your message and your light out there. But two, it's just gonna help you refine, and be able to like get more clarity around it for yourself too. So. Very good. All right. Well, thank you so much again. Thank you, everybody, again for tuning in. Oh, go ahead. What happened? Uh-oh. Are we good? Oh. All right. Well, I think it's reconnecting on hers, but thank you guys.